3 million children currently without parent supervision.
The number of households where grandchildren are being raised by grandparents.
Now, this is a big thing for me, having spent the last 7 years of my life working face-to-face with abandoned teenagers and children back in Australia.
Parents have moved abroad or into urban areas for job opportunities and higher wages.
In millions of households across rural Thailand, grandma and grandpa feeding the little ones, mom and dad nowhere in the picture.
Can children be raised in a healthy way, away from their biological parents, in a rural village, by their extended family and neighbours? I want to have a talk about that today.
I miss my kids so much. I want to live with them, hug and kiss them, and play and hang out with them.
So people in rural Thailand, for decades, they've spent time away from their homes in the city, earning extra money in between planting and harvest. Things have changed in recent times.
In part because agricultural jobs no longer provide a reliable income.
Now, I saw evidence of this on my recent travels through Isan. The vast majority of agriculture is rice and corn crops. The income from growing a rice crop one time a year equals 5 baht per 1 square metre. Now, these days, that's a pretty poor return. So let's talk about family separation. Currently, 3 million children are being raised by someone other than their own parents. Now, the homeless teenagers I worked with in Australia, they had experienced neglect and trauma in levels of the extreme. Now, this could be a tad triggering, so be warned, proceed with caution. I want you to imagine an infant crawling from their house towards the street and at the last minute looking back at their parent for reassurance, but mum's passed out on the porch, or dad yells back and then slams the door and goes inside. What's just happened to the kids learning? What did they learn just then? Well, on this occasion, they've learned that crawling towards the road does not warrant concern.
It's this back and forth serve and return interaction that literally shapes the architecture of the brain.
And multiply these lessons over months or years, and you end up with a legacy of neglectful learning. So what is serve and return?
Serve and return begins when a child looks at something or observes something. That represents the serve, and the return is when the parent notices the child doing these things and responds to the child.
Now, that's partly why so many of my teenagers were so quick to anger, or they'd exhibit an emotional response that wasn't quite in line with what you'd expect.
Neglect both fails to provide the stimulation that's needed to develop the basic architecture, and when it's at a certain level, is one of the most potent activators of the stress biology of a young child.
While editing this video, I noticed my girlfriend Lily, a 20-year veteran of Bangkok city life, eating her lunch on the floor of the kitchen in what I assess as some deep-rooted desire to retain some semblance of her traditional rural customs, even after residing in large cities since age 14. The point? Domestic migration isn't easy, it's big. I should say that I'm not trying to beat up on parents who move from rural Thailand to the cities because they have to. It's purely out of necessity, and it cannot be easy, right? I'm trying to imagine that pain of separation, especially if you're separating yourself from a newborn baby. Just this week, I learnt that one of the girls from the bars that I do photography in has a 3-month-old baby back at the village.
I earn about $8.50 a day.
It's not like growing up a couple of hours drive outside of Sydney or Los Angeles or London or Vancouver or Auckland. The differences between city life and rural Thailand life are massive.
Pramailur Subchat is urging his daughter to return.
I wish I could have raised my own children, but it hasn't been possible.
Now, I think the repercussions of growing up with elderly grandparents can have an effect on schooling and education. I know Lily's 13-year-old daughter studies both English and Mandarin at her school, and I know that's something her village grandparents are simply unable to help with. Being raised by a 70-year-old adult is completely different in comparison to being raised by a 30-year-old adult. Elderly people, they go to bed early. They likely can't go out and play sport with the kids. Children, especially infants, require a key caregiver in order to develop effective stress responses.
Think fight or flight. Now, when a child's left in the care of another person, or particularly multiple other people, parent are no longer able to guarantee child's learning pathways may not be as regimented as if they were under your full-time guidance. So when a child reaches adolescence and they've retained these lessons they've learned earlier on, then they're going to take that information with them into new social situations. Now, that's basically the framework for beginning to understand childhood trauma.
Science points to 4 categories of this spectrum of neglect. The first category, where children experience responsiveness most of the time, but occasionally adults don't respond. There's no harm in that, and in fact, there's probably some benefit.
A child can learn to self-soothe and explore the environment, and all of those opportunities build brain architecture.
The second category, scientists would call chronic understimulation. Children have less interaction with the adults around them than is needed for healthy development.
Now I know a lot of grandparents do a great job at child rearing, and I also know that there's 3 million children in Thailand without a parent close by, and that's just a wild figure.
The third category is what science would call severe neglect, where not only are there prolonged periods of inattention, but often also associated with not being fed enough, not being bathed enough. The community pays a huge price later. Neglecting young children is neglecting the foundations of a healthy next generation.
I moved here secure in the knowledge that I don't have to change anything. I'm not a voter, I'm not Thai, and all I can do is observe and report.
Under conditions where serve and return is broken, you literally are pulling away what is the essential ingredient of the development of human brain architecture.
At 70, Chan Pen didn't expect to be raising kids, but she has little choice, with grandchildren aged 5 and 8 left in her care while their parents work in Bangkok. The family live in Bandur, a village in Thailand's poor rice farming region of Isan. 1/3 of all children here are being raised by their grandparents.
I guess I'm just serving up questions at this point. I really look to you for answers, because at the moment, I ain't got any.
My children needed to move to work in Bangkok. They can't take their children to live with them. It's too expensive, so they send their kids to me.
According to experts, young children raised without their parents suffer at school and in their wider development. They lag behind in language and social skills, as their grandparents are often too old to help with reading, telling stories, or playing games.
This may have been a bit of a frustrating video, and I apologise. Thank you for tuning in and hanging in there, and I think tomorrow we'll return to the regular, happier programming. See you later, guys.